Salman Rushdie. Hello.
Hi, nice to be back.
It's a pleasure to have you. So this story begins just after the financial crash, just after the election of Barack Obama. You write that this, and I love this line, this is when ISIS was still an Egyptian mother goddess. Why were you drawn to this time as a starting point?
Well, I just thought I wanted to somehow try and capture a really very strange moment in American life, this last decade, moving from a time of great optimism to in a way to its antithesis, in between the two presidential elections, and when there's been so many things bubbling up in people's minds and obsessing people, all sorts of issues of identity. The novel is about somebody trying to change his identity, so the question of identity is right at the heart of it. But then there's all kinds of other ways of looking at identity. Right now, in New York, anyway, if you raise the subject of identity, many people will assume you're talking about gender identity. And so there's at least one character who is very conflicted about that. And so I was just trying to grab hold of what was in the air, and try and make a story out of it.
I want to get to some of the identity issues you're talking about in just a moment, but there is this character in the Golden House called the Joker.
Oh yes,
yeah, and the Joker is, he's reminiscent of the Joker, we'll say, from Batman. Green hair, white skin.
Very white skin.
Yeah, red mouth. He ends up becoming the 45th president of the United States. So what parallels are there between Donald Trump and the Joker?
Well, in the book, he's a real estate tycoon, but it really came out of a kind of little private joke of mine, which is that in a deck of playing cards, the two weird playing cards are the Trump and the Joker. Those are the playing cards that don't behave like the other playing cards.
Right.
And so I thought I didn't want to use the name Trump in the book. It doesn't.
Why not?
Just I thought too boring, and so I thought instead of that I'll have the Joker, and also just to make the point that in the same way as the movies seem to be getting taken over by comic books, it seems as if Washington might be as well. That we're being ruled by supervillains.
But you've met Donald Trump, right?
I've met him. A long time ago, but long before.
A Crosby, Stills and Nash concert.
That
is
was
that
the
right?
first time. Yes, so it was in about the year 2000 at Madison Square Garden. No Neil Young, just Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Good.
But I just accidentally had seats very near him and his children. And the thing that surprised me was that he knew the words to all the songs. He was on his feet singing along.
To Woodstock.
Woodstock. Who knew?
But you've been living in New York for how long now?
No, 19 years, I guess.
I'm assuming you see him around.
Well, not anymore because he's now
of course,
hightailed it because nobody likes him. But yeah, you would see him around, and I think in New York people got used to having him around and thought of him as a kind of village idiot. Kind of, and thought of him as a kind of fraud. Somebody we knew his ways of doing business, his stiffing contractors, and all his properties being horribly leveraged. It's all based on debt, etc. So he wasn't a very impressive figure, and I think maybe America's finding out what New York already knew.
I read that you had about 95% of this book, The Golden House, done
before the election.
Before the election, but when the election happens, when Donald Trump is elected, does that change how you? Did that last 5%?
No, because strangely, my book guessed right. I guessed wrong.
Right. Because on Twitter you say, hashtag Madam President.
Absolutely. I went out to vote and was hopeful, that the other thing would happen. But the book appeared to know what was going to happen. The book insisted on this particular arc happening, and so I didn't have to change very much at all.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q. My name is Tom Power. I'm joined in the studio by Sir Salman Rushdie. His new novel is The Golden House, and the central story in the book is about a wealthy family with a shady past who immigrate to New York. And the question becomes, is it actually possible to start again? So what do you think? Can we escape our past?
Well, I think in real life, yeah. I think you walk down the streets of any big metropolis, and you see people who've come from all over the world and have quite successfully, made new lives for themselves and their families. So I think in real life you can. In a novel, I think you can't. I think if I tell you like on page 1 or 2, that this family is trying to escape a very shady past, then at some point I'm going to tell you what the shady past
or
is.
you better.
Otherwise that's going to be a pretty bad novel.
Yeah, right, right.
So I think in fiction, the past always comes to get you.
But what about you? I mean, you've had to go through reinvention yourself. I mean, as an immigrant yourself, having lived through the fatwa, how does reinvention resonate with you?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm that different, really. I mean, obviously, I'm not the person that I would have been if I had never left India. If I'd continued to live there. But I was very young when I was just out of college when I made the decision to stay in England. And I think now, I mean, if you ask anybody who's known me for a long time, I don't think there's that much difference in me now than when I was living in London. I think it's more or less the same person.
So why does the idea of reinventing oneself and becoming new appeal to you so much?
Because it is one of the things that is a consequence of the phenomenon of migration, and the phenomenon of migration is such a huge one now that you might almost call this the age of migration. As more people have moved across the world in the last 100 years than ever before in the history of the human race. And migration always carries with it challenges about transformation, about, you come to a place where people don't know you and maybe they speak a different language and they have different belief systems. And the question is, what do you keep of what you bring with you in your baggage, and what do you let go of? What do you absorb from the place you come to, and what do you reject? I think it's a very profound kind of existential experience. So, and since I've done it twice, moving from India to England and then from England to America, I mean, it's obviously a big subject for me.
I was reminded of The Great Gatsby while reading your novel, and I think your novel, The Golden House, is getting compared a lot to The Great Gatsby.
Well, it's very flattering.
Well, but there's that final
I'll
line.
take it.
I assume so. So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about that final vision of Gatsby is that there is no escaping the past. You're trying to go forward, but you're against the current. And I mean, I think the thing that the book, I mean, it seems almost embarrassing to me to compare the book to The Great Gatsby, but the thing that they do try and do similarly is this question of the reinvention of the self, because Jay Gatsby is not his real name. Mm-hmm. Nero Golden is not Nero Golden's real name. They've renamed themselves and remade themselves in the case of Gatsby for Love.
Were you thinking about this while you were writing the novel at all?
Well, I knew that it was so, and of course I have a young narrator looking in on the story of the Golden family and kind of in a way spying on it, to tell it to us. I think René, my narrator, I think there's a point in the novel where he thinks he's like Nick Carraway, the narrator of The Great Gatsby, but he's very different in one very crucial particular, which is that Nick Carraway is always on the edges of the action. He never actually intrudes into the main story of Gatsby and Daisy and so on. Mm-hmm. Whereas René didn't want to stay on the fringes. When I was writing the book, there's a crucial moment when he crosses that boundary from being an observer to being a participant in their lives, and then he's mixed up in the mess as well.
I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about how this book relates to the topic of identity, and one of the identity questions you explore in this book is about gender, specifically through a character who's struggling to understand it. I'm wondering what you did to understand that experience.
Well, it started from two places. One is that if you grow up in Bombay, as I did, there always has been quite a large, visible transgender community there, the so-called Hijra community. Mm-hmm. And I've, been amongst those people, and I've written nonfiction stuff about them in the past. So that gave me one sort of foothold in the subject.
Yeah, but you lived with them for 3 weeks or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did, because I was writing an article which appeared in a book about AIDS in India.
What did you learn from that experience that ended up in this book?
Well, it was just very profound. Just learning how their lives were. And some of them were very confident and articulate. Others were very damaged and in a way tormented. But all of them found enormous comfort in the structure of the life of their community, and were gravely at risk because one of their main forms of work was sex work, and often their clients were not willing to use condoms and so on, and so AIDS was spreading quite fast. And that was the reason for my being asked to go and do this. Meanwhile, in New York, in the time I've lived there, I've known two people, one of them very closely, who have transitioned, actually very successfully transitioned, one in each direction, actually. And in both cases are really much happier individuals now than they were before. So I've actually witnessed at least two cases of very successful gender reassignment, and so that I felt gave me at least a foothold, kind of personal, emotional connection to the material, and then I just tried to find out as much as I could. I talked to people, went places, tried to read things, and tried to do a serious job.
You say in your book that, well, a character in The Golden House says, there's a big difference. A character in The Golden House says, God is dead and identity fills the vacuum.
Well, it just seems to be an obsession right now of many different kinds, because in different parts of the world, we mean different things by it. So that in India, for example, when people talk about identity, they're really talking about religious identity. They're talking about kind of Hindu versus Muslim issues. In England, as the whole Brexit thing shows us, that the identity issue became a dream of some nostalgic vision of a fantasy England, that people wanted to revert to when there weren't any horrible foreigners around. And in America, I think, the United States, it's very much around two subjects. One is race and the other is gender. And so I invented this thing in the novel called the Museum of Identity.
The Museum of Identity, yeah.
Where all these things can be talked about.
Yeah. The narrator in The Golden House is a filmmaker, and your love of film comes through in the book. It made me think, though, you've written 13 novels. Only Midnight's Children has been adapted for film. Would you like to see? I mean, I couldn't help but watching Renee in this book, reading Renee in this book of him as a filmmaker, and I'm wondering whether you hoped that more of your books were films.
One or two of them have come close.
Yeah.
But one of the things, if you've ever been involved in the world of film, you know how easy it is for a film not to get made. There are so many ways that a film project can fall apart. Shame, there was a project at one point years ago when the great film director Costa Gavras was interested in doing a film of it, and that didn't happen. And similarly, there have been other things. So I mean, I don't know, maybe it will. But this book, I've had a lot of my friends telling me that this book is very cinematic, not only because
it takes place in a film in some ways.
But just the way in which the story is told. People say that it's very pictorial, and you can imagine the movie. So, I mean, keep your fingers crossed. If you know anybody, get them to make me an offer.
You know what? I think our emails are going to get flooded at the moment. I got $10 in my pocket right now. I got the new iPhone. I think I can handle The Golden House. Before we say goodbye, I have one question for you here, and this is a bit of a wild card. I was researching for this interview, and I saw an article that said you might be a guest on the new season of HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Did you indeed?
Is this true?
I don't think I can tell you that. They're very secretive.
Oh, man.
So, I think I have no comment to make.
How about that? So if I say the word Larry David to you?
Yeah. I know Larry David. I've met him a couple of times. I've talked to him about his impersonation of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
On Saturday Night Live, and etc. So yeah, Larry and I were close-ish.
I just love how I've heard you be so incredibly open about the things that humans have such a hard time talking about, but when it comes to Curb Enthusiasm,
my lips are sealed.
Salman Rushdie, thank you for coming in.